Well, good morning and welcome back. This is session 5 of carving a preening Hen Mallard with Tom Christie. That's me, and I appreciate those of you that have left comments, and that really is encouraging to me that people are getting value out of this series, because it does take some time to put the videos together, so I appreciate that. If you are getting value out of it, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. That'll make sure that you get notification of any new content that I put up as it comes along. And I plan on continuing to add content to the website. And I'm getting some good feedback on what people would like to see. So don't be afraid to leave a comment in that regard. Again, I can't promise that I'll be able to deliver on all those asks, but I can at least try, and I can promise that I'll read your comments and respond. Let's get started. The next thing we're going to do is develop the body, finish the body. I want to do a little carving up here on the breast to finish that up. We're going to do a little bit of work on the speculum just to put some carving detail in there. I want to work on the tail feathers on this particular carving. Again, it's totally up to you whether you want to take the time to do this additional carving or not. I just figured I'll err on the side of more is better, and then you can leave out things. If you want to just paint the tail feathers on, you're good to go. So we'll get started on that. Again, thanks for coming back, and let's get carving. Hey, before we do get carving, I did have a question about the tools that I'm using, because in the videos, a lot of times you can't see, is it a burr, is it a carbide cutter? This is that 1/4 inch cylindrical burr that I've been using for a lot of things, and you can see it has the teeth on the end. I also use carbide cutters from time to time, if I can get a focus on that. And they do pretty much the same thing. I use a burr like this a lot, just a little cone-shaped burr, lets you get into tight spots. And these are saber-tooth burrs that I've been using to hog off wood. And here's a little close-up of the rougher burr that I've been using. And then for the finer work, we're going to be using a lot of small stuff. These are basically ruby bits or diamond bits, and small cylindrical bits are a favorite. I'll try to call them out as I use them. Little bowl shapes are important for like a nostril. I am going to use that cylindrical burr to just develop a little shape in the breast, in the front of the decoy. And this is anatomically accurate, but also adds a little bit to the composition. It kind of follows this nice graceful flow of the neck back. So I just want to put that detail in first. Then I'm going to be using a drum sander. This is about a 1/2 inch or a 3/8 inch drum sander. Basically going to sand the bird with that. Before doing that, I've used a kind of a cone-shaped ruby to smooth out a lot of the lines that were created by this rough burr. So burr first, then I'm using the ruby to go over and knock down and take out deep scratches, and then I'm going to finish with this. And then we'll come back and do the carving that I talked about, the detailed carving. All right, now let's get going. Just going to use that cylindrical burr to follow those pencil lines that I put on here. And I'm digging down a little bit, not too deep here. We don't want to create trenches, but then you can see I'm rounding that off after I do an initial cut down. And then I'm taking material out of that triangular area between the sections of the breast just to make it a little bit lower. So we're casting a little bit of a shadow down there. I'm going to speed this up. Just going back and forth with the burr and making sure it's nice and round. Rounding those breast sections, and then I'm going to stop about right there and not take that line up any closer to the neck. Just shows you that carving that's been done. Now I'm going to use the drum sander and just kind of clean that up and soften things more. I think I have a 120 grit on this drum sander. I'm going to finish that up and then use this drum sander to sand the entire bird. And I'm not going to bore you with video of me sanding, but I'll use that drum sander and kind of go over the entire bird. All right, I've got some of the sanding done. You can see there's still some bumps and bumps that I'm going to have to smooth out, but I wanted to get it to this condition before we work on some of the detail. And then the final step in sanding is just some hand sanding, because the drum just isn't going to get everything for you, and sometimes you need a little bit of I use a roll like this and do a lot of hand sanding to get in tight spots, etc. So what we're going to do next is there are a couple of little details that I want to add that really can help create some life in the bird. I put a little triangle up here in the front corner, and if I were to draw the wing in here, dotted line, it tucks down in the side pocket here, goes back and links up with the primary flight feathers back here. So I want to dig this area out a little bit and relieve that area to create the illusion that the wing is tucked in under there. And the other thing I'm going to do to promote that is I'm not going to go right where the wing is, but kind of under that area. I'm going to carve out some of this, take some wood out of here, back down to what I think the normal shape of the decoy would be, and then round this area so that we have a little bit of a bump here, and that indicates these side pocket feathers are being pushed out a little bit by the wing there, and it just adds to the look of the decoy. The other thing we're going to work on is some tail feathers. I mentioned that. So this is the center of the tail. So we're going to go in, and these are splayed out. I'll probably go back over these. I'm just demonstrating kind of layout. And then we're going to cut out these areas where the tips of the feathers are to give you that very characteristic look of a splayed out tail. So we'll do that. And then we're going to do some work on the speculum. I just want to layer the speculum feathers here. So we'll do some layout work to show where they lie. And then we're going to relieve some of that so we end up with a little bit of a step on both sides. I'm going to start with a little flame-shaped ruby bit and use that to dig in that triangular area. Drive down and open up that area a little bit, starting at the front. And we want to go deep enough to convey that there's depth to the wing itself. So I'm just using that flame ruby bit to kind of relieve things, and then I'm rounding the front edge of the wing there, you can see. Now I'm going deeper and actually undercutting where the wing meets the body. And you can see that casts a little shadow now and makes it look like the wing is tucked into that side pocket. Now I'm switching to the little cylindrical bit with, this is a ruby bit, and it also has ruby texture on the end of it, so you can use it perpendicular like this and clean up that area. I'm switching back to that ruby bit, and we're just going to work this a little bit more to create definition and make a nice soft transition, and then just sharpening up those upper scapulars so they cast a little shadow in that area. So you can just use that ruby bit and then some sandpaper to clean it up. Now I'm going to use that 1/4 inch cylindrical burr again and go after this area where the wing has bumped out the side pocket a bit and create the illusion in the wood that area is being impacted by the wing tucking in behind the side pocket. So I took a nice deep cut there, and then I'm starting to remove wood underneath and take that area back to kind of the normal shape you would expect from the decoy in that decoy body in that area, and then rounding underneath. I'm going to speed this up so you can kind of watch the process. Okay, I've created that little shelf, and now I want to blend it back and continue to work it. We don't want anything harsh there. We don't want a harsh line. This is going to end up, it has to look soft. So I'm going to keep working this back and forth, and then eventually we'll sand it as well so we get a nice look. But you can see the way the light casts a shadow there. Now I'm using the drum sander to just sand that area out and soften it and make sure there's no hard line there. And then we'll paint over that area, so there will be all kinds of feathers in that grouping. It looks a little harsh right now, but it'll soften once the decoy gets painted. You'll still get that subtle shadow indicating there's some feathers bumped out in that area, and that's what I'm trying to achieve there. Now I'm just going to hand sand that area so that I can really get in and make a nice soft transition, eliminate any grinding lines there. It's kind of off screen, but there you can see it's a little softer looking now. Okay, some quick anatomy and layout of tail feathers on a hen mallard. There are normally a couple of shorter feathers in the center here. Then the longer feathers kind of lay under those. There are normally 16 feathers in the tail of a puddle duck, so we want to be in that ballpark. And keep in mind that these feathers attach kind of in a fanned out way, so you don't want your tail feathers just pointing out in space here or lined up like soldiers. This tail is splayed out like that, and we want to convey that in the way we lay out the feathers. So I'm going to use a knife to score the edges that I've laid out here. Okay, when I'm using the knife and doing this job, I want to be on a nice firm surface. So I've moved over to this section of the bench, and I'm just gonna very carefully, don't force things, but follow these guidelines that I've given myself. You get close to the tip, pull up a little bit so you don't just drive it right through, and score each one of these feathers in turn. Take your time. We don't want any slips when you've got a lot of pressure on a very sharp knife. I'll go ahead and score the others and then come back. Now that I have those scored, I'm going to use this little cylindrical ruby bit to go along the edge of each one of those and relieve the wood on the next feather down, so we create kind of little steps. This is a little tough to see from this angle, but I'm basically following those scored knife lines along the edge of each tail feather and taking wood off of the next feather down so that we create a little bit of a step. And we don't want those to be real thick and deep because those tail feathers are very thin. So we just want a ridge there. And as I said before, you can do this or not. I chose to put this level of detail in this particular carving. It's not going to be a working decoy. It's going to be in a collection on a mantle somewhere. Actually, carving a tail like this makes it even more challenging to paint because a smooth surface gives you a lot of options. When you're painting a carved surface like this, you've got to live with the carving that you've done and paint in and around those carved lines. So it makes it a little more challenging to paint a carved tail like this. So just take your time, relieve each of those. You can see when I hold this up, it casts a little shadow each of those feather steps. Next, I'm going to get a little ruby bit, kind of shaped triangular, and just use that to sand those grinding marks smooth. Go along the edge of each tail feather and smooth those up a bit before I hand sand them. Now that I have those tail feathers relieved, I'm going to go back in with the pencil and plan where I need to remove wood to define the feather tips. And pay attention to your reference. Those feather tips on the tail are not sharp like a spear. They have a definitive shape to them. So pay attention. I see a lot of people get that wrong and just assume the feather is symmetrical around the feather quill, and they're not. So now I'm going to use that little cylindrical burr, and this is an area you really need to be careful because a burr grinding on end grain like this has a tendency to want to snag and roll out of there because it's taking off wood quickly. You can use a ruby bit and it won't snag like a burr does. I'm just using this because it's fast and I have experience with it. But it does have a tendency to want to pull around the underside of the tail if you're not careful. So just be careful with that. I'm going to finish that tail up and then come back. Now I'm using the little flame-shaped ruby bit. I'm just going to go between those areas that I ground and clean things up a bit. Take a quick look at the way the tail is shaping up. And I'll go in with sandpaper and do some finish sanding. Don't need to watch that. You can see it's shaped up pretty good, and there's still some thickness in the tail. This is not a full decorative bird, so I want to keep some strength there. Now I'm going to use the knife and the same process we used for the tail feathers. I'm going to go to the speculum and do the same thing there. And I'm holding this bird at an angle, which is not a good thing to do, but it's a better camera angle. I'm going to do the rest of this flat on the table. Now I'm going to use that little cylindrical ruby, like we did on the tail feathers, and go ahead and follow the scored lines by the knife and relieve wood from the next lower feather in the speculum and create a little step there. Again, we don't want this to be too deep. Those feathers on a real bird, very thin and lie close to each other, so we don't want to create a big shadow there, but just enough to create some separation between feathers. This bit does have texture on the end of it, so it allows you to put it up on end and in real tight spots, like down here at the bottom of this speculum. I'm going to put it perpendicular to the surface and use the end of the bit to remove wood and finish the job. Just give you a quick look at that in the light. You can see just a subtle shadow cast on each one of those, and we'll do some sanding on that. All right, I think we're going to stop there for the day. We've got some of the fine carving details done now. Just give you a quick look at that. All right, we made some good progress today, and we're getting close. Next time we'll attach the head and blend that into the body. But as I said, I don't want these videos to go too long, so we'll keep them reasonable in length. And until the next session, I'll see you later. Good carving to all of you.